Hey, what's up, guys? This is your first homework assignment of the second semester. We're rolling into topic 6.6, labor in the Gilded Age. As we go along, remember you're filling this out on your framework, annotating, doing whatever you got to do because that's what I'm going to take up, and that's what your grade's going to be based on. So, starting us off with learning objective one under it, here's what you've got to do when it comes to this topic and how you've got to tie it back into the bigger picture. You need to be able to explain the socio-economic continuities and changes associated with the growth of industrial capitalism. So you need to know the things that we talked about with industrialism and be able to explain how that led to these changes and continuities and etc. So moving down to the first box for A, the expansion of the industrial workforce, child labor, and horrible working conditions led to conflict between management and labor. So as we go into that, you've got to provide some evidence that proves that point. So here are the conditions that are going to lead to the labor unrest, which is going to tie into what's coming down the line here. Well, first of all, as we're going with it, one of the things is going to be people are just not making as much money. We have stagnating wages. By 1890, there are 11 million families in this country, approximately, because nobody really knows for sure, that are making less than $380 per year. And it's going to stay like that or lower throughout this period. So you've got people making less money or basically the same money while prices for things begin to go up, along with the loss of skilled labor. We will talk about that in class, how industrialism and factory work leads to artisanal or skilled labor and stuff like that. You've got people working on the clock for the first time as they come into the cities from the countryside, being farmers or whatever they did, like they're used to working their own schedule. There's a level of independence. Now they're forced to work when the bell rings. And that's a drastic change for some people that they don't respond well to. And then you've got the dangerous work conditions, as you can see on the right over here. You're dealing with molten metal, you're dealing with long hours, bad environmental conditions within these factories and everything else, and accidents happen. So these things are going to lead to the groups, the development of the groups coming forward, and some of the things that they did. All right, so B, this kind of sets up what we're going to do, and it deals with the tactics that both labor and management use to address some of those problems and conditions that are plaguing the industrial workforce during this time. When I say labor, I'm talking about the workers in the factories and the people who represent them, with that being unions during this time, and then management is going to deal with factory owners, factory managers, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to things that management did to attempt to take care of these problems. One of the first one is going to be, these are in no particular order of importance, but you do need to be able to reference some of these when it comes down to it. Management is going to use lockouts, which is self-explanatory. Basically, what they're going to do is if labor unrest starts to happen within their factories and there's some kind of dispute, they're just going to shut the thing down for a little while. And they're going to close the factories and try to, for lack of a better term, starve the employees out to make it to where they want to come back to work. You also have blacklists, which are basically a list of people who are workers who are members of unions or involved in union activity, and the factory owners would basically collude and not hire these people to work in their factories. Then you've got, if there is one main event of this topic, one of the ways in which management attempted to deal with labor unrest, you have the creation of what are called yellow dog contracts, which basically means that when a person is hired in a factory, they sign a contract saying they would not join a union, and if they did, they would be pretty much fired on the spot. Then you have private guards and publicized in fear, things that you'll see a little bit as we go forward with some examples and stuff like that. On the other side, you've got what labor is attempting to do to get management to meet their demands for improved conditions and the things that they're looking for. They're going to do things like slow down work. They're going to walk out. They're going to attempt to hit these factory owners in the pocketbook to make it hurt a little bit to get some kind of leverage on them. If that doesn't work, they're going to go to strikes, picketing, boycotts, basically marching outside of the factory, holding signs, as you see in the picture, attempting to draw attention to get public pressure on the factory owners to meet their demands. And then you have collective bargaining, which is one that doesn't necessarily revolve around workers leaving the factories or work or anything like that. It basically means that representatives of the employees will go into a meeting with management, with factory owners, whoever it is, and they will bargain, as they will negotiate as a group for working conditions for all. employees of that factory or of that production facility. So somebody represents them and bargains or negotiates for them as a group. So this is how they're going to attempt to put this stuff down, but as we'll see, it doesn't really work out all the time. So we get to kind of the organizational aspect of it with labor and management, and this is going to be the big change that happens during this time period. You've got labor and management battling over wages and working conditions, with workers organized in local and national unions and directly confronting business leaders. Keywords in this, the big changes. The development of unions and the direct confrontation with business leaders. So, all of these things that follow will be examples of that. First organization, we'll have three of them. This will go out on the right side as evidence. You got the National Labor Union that was created in 1866. This is going to be a labor union that is open to skilled and unskilled workers, along with industrial and agricultural workers as well. Out of the three that we'll talk about, this is probably the most open as far as membership and what they're looking for. So they're going to focus in on trying to get an 8-hour workday for employees, and they're also going to broaden out to attempt to get equal rights for women and African Americans as well. But really, when it comes down to it, it's going to be that 8 hours for it from a labor perspective with what they're looking for. Go forward a couple years, and you get the Knights of Labor in 1869. It's going to be developed or headed up by a man named Terrence Powderly, that is also going to be open to all workers. They're all looking for the same thing at the end of the day. They're looking for 8-hour work days. They're looking for better pay. They're looking for safer working conditions and stuff like that. It's just kind of how they go about that. It's going to be different. Along with these general conditions and things like that, the Knights of Labor are also going to be in favor, are going to attempt to form worker cooperatives, which we've already talked about co-ops when we talked about farming. So that's an employee-owned businesses or parts of businesses or something like that. They're going to attempt to get rid of child labor, which we will deal with later. They're also going to try to abolish monopolies and trust and try to get some kind of competition within the markets of whatever industry they're dealing with. And also, they're going to use arbitration instead of strikes. So they're not going to go out and strike or anything like that. They're basically going to meet with factory owners, management, et cetera, and they're going to have someone um, who's not involved on either side hear both sides of the dispute and then come to a decision to try to make both sides at least a little bit happy, or to alleviate or get rid of some of the anger and everything else on both sides. Then lastly, you have the American Federation of Labor in 1886, headed up by Samuel Gompers. This one is kind of our outlier. It's not going to be open to everyone. The AFL is only going to be open and available to skilled workers only. So your everyday, like average factory worker who's working on a line is probably not going to be able to, or is not going to have the ability to be accepted into the American Federation of Labor. They're looking for the same things: higher wages, better conditions. But your outlier and your point that you're going to make is going to be that they're a little bit more closed, or significantly more closed than these other two groups. So that has to do with the labor unions. Next is going to be how they went at and directly confronted business leaders. So we're going to have 4 examples. So make some room in the box. You should have some as it goes, or put it somewhere else, whatever you got to do. But 4 strikes that we're going to use as examples of this direct confrontation with business leaders. The first one is going to be the Great Railroad Strike in 1877. You can guess what this is dealing with. It's dealing with the railroad industry. It's going to be caused by the cutting of rail workers' wages. And then it's going to be the first strike in American history that really expands to multiple states and has more of a national effect than anything else. Because if you do something like shut down 2/3 of the railroads in the country, that's going to have an impact all throughout the country. Like not only goods getting from place to place, but also people, whatever it is. This thing expands out so much that President Rutherford B. Hayes is called upon to find some way to use the federal power to put this strike down, and he does. This is the first strike where federal troops are brought in. The Army is brought in to break up this strike, and as they do that, violence, as it does in many of these things, comes into play, and over 100 people are killed in the midst of the attempt to break this strike, which it does work, but it takes federal troops and violence to make it happen. The next one is going to be the Haymarket Bombing. This is not necessarily a strike, but it comes off of a strike that happens at the McCormick Harvester plant in Chicago in 1886. They're looking for the same things. They're looking for better wages, higher pay, et cetera, et cetera. The thing that makes this an outlier is that a group of anarchists, which is an actual group of people that believe in chaos, no government, et cetera, come in and start ramping things up. Basically, what ends up happens is as this strike is going on, they decide they're going to have a meeting in Chicago at in a public space, in a park, whatever you want to call it, and anarchists get involved as union leaders, as other people are speaking, and they turn it to violence. As it keeps going, the police try to break it up. A bomb is set off by an anarchist, and everything just kind of goes haywire, goes crazy with it. It ends up with 7 police officers being killed. The big thing for our purposes that comes into it is that the publicity and the newspaper accounts and everything that you'll see uh, after you do this homework assignment is gonna lead to a lot of people in America turning on unions because they believe they're just going to be a group that harbors anarchists. They're un-American, they're violent, they're radical, and everything else. So you need to be able to identify this as a turning point in the labor movement because it's going to end with the Knights of Labor that we just talked about. It's basically going to just like kill the support of it, no pun intended. Um, Next, we have the Homestead Strike with Carnegie Steel in 1892. This one occurs because Henry Clay Frick, who is the manager of the Carnegie Steel plant, is told by Carnegie to cut some money out of the budget. And the way that he decides to do that is to cut workers' wages upwards of 20%. Obviously, this is not going to sit well. They organize, they strike, and everything else. And Frick is kind of left alone to try to figure out how to break this thing up. So what he does is he calls in a group of private guards, private police called the Pinkertons, who come in and are charged with breaking up this strike. And they can do it any means necessary. And they do. Violence breaks out. 16 are killed. So be able to identify this as direct confrontation with business leaders, the violent aspect of it that plays into it, and everything else. And then lastly, we get 1894 with the Pullman Palace Strike from the Pullman Palace Car Company. Basically, what happens, they're cutting wages and everything else. So the workers at the Pullman Palace Car Company, which is passenger cars for railroads, strike. What makes this one a little bit different is that it expands beyond the actual workers, where they bring in another union to help them out. And that help is going to be led by Eugene Debs, a guy that you're going to hear a couple of times throughout the rest of the year, um, who heads up the American Railroad Union. He agrees to help these guys out. So he's going to have his workers who work for the railroads not pull or not use or not utilize Pullman cars to try to help put pressure on the company to meet their demands. Well, you end up with the conflict between management and labor and factory owners, railroad owners, to help the owners of Pullman tie their cars to mail cars, and then the railroad workers try to stop it. You just need to be able to identify this. This is the preeminent. This is the biggest example of labor and management directly confronting each other because there's things being done on both sides. End of the day, what it really comes down to is that the federal courts get involved in an injunction or an order is given by a federal court that says this strike has to end because it's illegal. It's against federal law to interfere with mail delivery, and that's what these railroad workers are doing when they're attempting to stop the Pullman cars from going, the ones that are attached to mail cars. So people will be arrested, they'll be fined, everything else if they keep these mail cars from going. That just basically leads to the strike ending because the workers then refuse to help the Pullman workers out anymore. I know that's kind of convoluted and confusing. I'll clear it up in class, but I'm trying to do this in a hurry. If you have any questions about it, ask me. But for now, just get the information down and we'll figure it out. All right, so it was short, sweet, to the point with 6.6. I apologize for not elaborating on a lot of stuff because I had to do this in a hurry. Make sure you get it on the framework, turn it in on the date it's due, and then we will discuss this stuff in class.